Welcome to Birken Monastery's live stream. I'm Ajahn Sona, and you're welcome to submit questions in the question bar, and we will attempt to answer them today. So let's proceed with the first question, Metta.
Yes, Ajahn Sona. Our first question is from the live stream from Prabjot from India. Greetings, Ajahn. I've been disposed to the study of astrology for the last 2 years and have concluded that almost everyone is engaged in a vocation, as the birth chart and stars have indicated. Even for Gautama Siddhartha, similar predictions were made, I have heard. Even for a renunciant or a prime minister, the birth chart stands true. So what is Buddhism's take on predestination? Why doesn't Buddhism point towards existence of such a Dhamma? It can also be used to point the way out of suffering.
Yeah, it's a matter of causality. It's very clear in the teachings of the Buddha that he rejects the notions of astrology. It's also clear in the Vinaya, or rules of conduct for monks, that they should not indulge in any of these types of activities, charting or reading palms or any of these kind of divination kind of practices. These are wrong, wrong knowledges, wrong livelihoods. So it's very clear. The Buddha wanted to focus away from that towards the responsibility of the individual, the moral responsibility of the individual in life, and that the primary whole purpose of gathering knowledge is actually for the cessation of suffering or the reduction of suffering. Astrology and so forth is attributing, as with many kinds of what we'd call silver bullet ideas, where everything ends up being attributed to a certain kind of causal structure. It's, you're because of the alignment of the stars, or it's because of diet, or certain kinds of exercises that can cure everything, or it's your faith in God. There's whole religions that claim that, all diseases are simply, sins and so forth, that they can be, it's because of a lack of faith or something in that you have these things. Others say, they attribute it to uranium deposits in the soil or something. These are single bullet kind of strategies for getting some sort of comprehension in life. The Buddha does not agree with any of those things. In some ways, there are multiple influences on our lives. And perhaps, to some degree, things like gravitational pull is an influence on our life. The lunar effects on the tide and so forth there are effects on life and so forth. But these are mixed in with multiple causes. So the Buddha's emphasis on what you need to know in order to navigate profitably in life, to sail your ship towards non-suffering, is called dependent origination. And it is an sort of causal examination of why you are the way you are, why your body is the way it is, the circumstances of your life. And they're not based on astrological ideas. They're not on biorhythms. I mean, in modern times, we have all kinds of these quasi-scientific explanations of why things are the way it is. There was a fashion called biorhythms, and it pops up every now and then. Wish fulfillment, God is doing it all, you're in the wrong religion, this and that. So the Buddha is giving the causes as primarily moral causes. If you want to undo the causes of your misfortunes, then you need to put in the right causes. And the causes, so it is causal, so it's not random, but it's a number of different causes. So in order to, your primary thing is that a person is functioning with ignorance. There's lots of things we don't know, and we do things out of mistaken ideas. In our relationship, so somebody is told to go off and kill the neighbor, in a neighboring village, etc. They do it because they think that's the appropriate thing to do. But they do it out of ignorance. They've been misinformed. So ignorance is the primary problem in life, and knowledge, appropriate knowledge, the right kind of knowledge, is the cure for this. And the primary types of ignorance are moral ignorance. So we do negative things based on greed and hatred. We act, we think, we speak, we act with greed or hatred, agitation, confusion, sloth, confusion and befuddlement. We act on these things and we get negative results from these intentional actions. The roots of these intentional actions are delusion, misinformation, disinformation, and lack of information. So you can see all of the follies of humanity because of lack of information. They believe certain things and it dooms them. There's a whole cult of solar sacrifice in Mexico and South America. The idea that the sun, which was worshipped as some sort of deity, would get pale as it went to the south, and the only cure for this was to sacrifice living human beings on an altar by removing their still beating heart right out of their chest by these priests. And that was going to restore the vitality of the sun. And sure enough, every year it would, bring the sun back and more warmth and so forth, see. So a big mistake based on ignorance and an attribution of causality to human sacrifice to the return of this solar positioning. So be cautious and understand that in all of human history, we continuously misattribute causes. We misplace what's important. We give pseudo explanations of why things are working in a certain way. We can become fixed with views and opinions about this. We identify with our ideas of science. Now, and this includes modern science as well. Again and again, we've made mistakes in science, just simply wrong ideas in sort of Western science in the last 200 years, 300 years. There was a substance which was supposed to explain why rusting occurred and so forth. Turns out there isn't. This whole invention of a substance which explained these things turned out to be unnecessary. There was also, right from the time of Aristotle needed to explain how things functioned in space, and so he attributed a substance to it called ether. And from the time of Aristotle, 300 BC, until almost the early 20th century, scientists assumed there was something called an ether in what is called space, because light had to travel through a medium, etc. And then we realized that there is no such thing as ether. Light travels through empty space, All of these things, they're assumptions, misinformation, guesses based on authority, etc., and people are convinced of it, and it turns out, no, it's false. So we need to examine causality. And the Buddha's primary causal interest is your emotional health, what causes destruction, the internal destruction of the mind, its pain and suffering, its attitudes. So primarily, he's not really interested in the other types of speculations. And astrological predestination is a speculation. And if you can change your mind, do it, and don't worry about theories that tell you that you can't. Because if you can't, then there's no harm in trying to find out that you can. So you want to assert your determination and your will and see what the results are. And many, many millions and millions of people have, when they encounter Dhamma, or the teachings of the Buddha, they assert their intention and their will, and they get good results again and again. So it appears that you can change your mind in a beneficial way. This is why the sixth factor of the Eightfold Path is called right effort. The Buddha says to the monks, "Monks, you can make effort. If you could not make effort, I would not say, monks, make effort, but because you can make effort, O monks, therefore I say, monks, make effort." And the fact that he's saying to monks to make effort does not mean that he's not saying it to lay people. Lay people, make effort because you can. So that's, we have to get that straight. Often in Asia, there's all kinds of layers of history mixing into Buddhist ideas, including astrology and so forth, palm reading, all kinds of pseudo knowledges. And they're often thought to be something to do with the Buddha or not. But if we look at the early suttas, we see that he's very much opposed to these notions, and that he forbids the monks from entering into these types of practices. Yeah.
The next question from the chat is from Quasator from Melbourne, Australia. If the degree of suffering is proportional to the clinging we have to sense pleasure, do beings in hell suffer physically, even though they have no sense pleasure to cling to?
Yeah, the clinging is it's not necessarily you don't realize you're clinging. It's just a conditioned response, yes, the beings in these realms of pain, niraya and so forth. These are, we call it hell in the West and so forth, but they're just realms of graphic pain, and they certainly do experience pain. And it's not because they're clinging to sense desires. They don't have any notion of anything outside of their sensory experience. So they can't stand aside from their sensory experience. They're totally engaged in the sensory experience of pain. And when they have physical pain, they also experience mental pain. It is possible to separate these two, but it requires a great deal of cultivation of the mind to find detachment from the sensory experience of pain, pleasure, and neutral feelings. Requires a great deal of psychological practice to be able to stand aside from the sensory experiences. So certainly the beings in hell have no sense of philosophical detachment at all from the sensory experiences of pain. So they're in pain both physically and mentally. Yeah.
The next question from the chat is from Al. Dear Ajahn, I left a job where I was treated with hostility. I made complaints to managers, but nothing changed. It is difficult not to have resentment for these people. Any advice, please?
Right, so you're still there. you say you left, but you're still there. They're still tormenting you. And they will until you leave. In other words, you've left bodily, but you're still there mentally. So the idea is like, why would you continue to do this to yourself? You didn't like it when they did it to you. Now you do it to yourself. So where are these people? You're not there with them. They're in your head. And why are they in your head? Are they allowed to come into your head without your invitation? No. You invite them in. You spend half the day inviting your enemies into your mind, and there they torment you. They say nasty things. They devalue your capacities and so forth. Why do you invite them in? You should not invite them in. You make a determination. Make an envelope with the names of the people who bother you, and put it in that envelope, and then say, and write on it, I shall not ever bring this person to mind. And put a date on it, maybe 10 years. Because maybe after 10 years you can think back on it with equanimity. But if you can't think of these people and your relationship to them without at least equanimity, do not bring them to mind. Because you're the one that suffers. They forgot about you. They're not thinking about you. You're the one that's suffering because you keep bringing them into your mind. So stop doing that. You're the one that's tormenting yourself. So you didn't like it when they did it. So why would you do it to yourself? So this is a determination. You don't have to. There's no psychological analysis of this or any profit in this. You simply make a strong determination and carry it out. And if you, especially in the first week, your habit structures will bring you back. You must be very conscious for the first week of not bringing these people to mind at all. And usually after the first week, then the mind gets the idea, I don't think about those things. Neither in the night or in the day. Neither in the morning or in the evening. And so you cancel that, and in the meantime, you turn your attention and bring people who are friends of yours, who are supportive to you, that you feel great goodwill towards, bring them into your mind. And spend much time in company with the wise and the kind, okay? Yeah.
The next question from the chat is from Ryan. It sounds like he's not from the Peruvian rainforest any longer. He's back in the city now, having lived in the rainforest for 6 months. And I'm finding the city noise exasperating and conductive to inversion. However, I am committed to using this opportunity to develop my practice and find samadhi and equanimity amidst the city chaos. I'm wondering if this is even possible. Could you kindly provide your wisdom or any tips?
Yeah, one shouldn't ignore your external environment. You probably should make as much effort as you can to quiet your environment, get some sound blankets or better windows or something, reduce the input. There's headphones, noise-canceling headphones and things like that. It's unfortunate that you have to be in such a noisy place. Do you really have to be there? So the Buddha doesn't just say ignore all the external things. He's very clear and it's very clear that noise is a thorn to serenity. And especially human noises. We're particularly tuned into the sound of people's voices, people shouting in the background, playing music, and dogs barking and things like this. This is kind of things that catch our attention and make it difficult to have peace and go inward. So, you'll hear, if you ask some other people, they say, oh, it's just, don't bother the noise or things like that. Or, if you can't possibly get out of it, if you can't shield yourself from these noises, well, you'll have to deal with it as well as you can. But there's no reason why you can't make some sort of a reduction of intrusive sounds through just use your intelligence and become clever about that, and say that, sometimes, and lots of people say, well, it's simply not a place I'm going to live. The noise is not worth it for me. I need to move to a quieter place. Or they get noise-canceling headphones or things like this. So, yeah, make every physical effort you can to reduce that intrusion. And then whatever is left over, try not to, become obsessed with or angry at these sounds. We try to not to be. But again, be kind to yourself and reduce the exposure to these noises. Monasteries are set up like this. There's a story about the Buddha. The Buddha's in a monastery. He's not oblivious to this. And he doesn't want the monks to be oblivious to sounds and noises. So a bunch of monks come to visit the Buddha, and they're wearing wooden sandals. And they're clunking around outside the temple where the Buddha is in these wooden sandals, making a racket. And the Buddha hears this, and he tells his attendant at that time, it was Sariputta, I think, to send those monks away. I'm not going to talk to them. Just send them away. And they're shocked at this. Sariputta goes out and says, Buddha doesn't want to see you. You're utterly disrespectful and insensitive. You're clunking around in these wooden sandals, making noise. What's wrong with you? So, and then the Buddha says, well, what happened to those monks? And he said, well, I sent them away. He said, yeah, well, okay, go get them and bring them back. Now they have learned a lesson. And to this day, you don't wear wooden, clunking, noisy sandals around monasteries. So it's not that we're aloof from all of these intrusions of noise. It's to be expected that people who are sensitive understand it's an area of quiet, of respect for others, and respect for the other person's appreciation of quiet and peace. So if you respect yourself, then you will make an effort to find a quieter place. Yeah.
The next question from the chat is from Alex. Dear Ajahn, I have practiced in and out of monasteries, and I always encounter the same dichotomy. Are the schedule, duties, and responsibilities more important than removing the hindrances? For example, if I am feeling very anxious and need to meditate so it doesn't get worse, should I do that instead of going to the group chores or the chanting? How does one determine one's priorities in practice?
Well, usually in monasteries, you don't really have a choice. If there are group chores or chanting, you go, even though you don't feel like it. So it's not up to the person either. Usually, if people don't show up at these meetings and so forth, then they probably just be told to leave. That there is a social element to monasteries where you must participate in the duties and the chores. There isn't. It's not up to the individual. So when you're in that situation, yeah, it's not always the best situation to be in. A monastery, especially a busy monastery, is not always the best situation. Sometimes solitary practice can be superior to that. But quite often when people are in solitary practice, they don't have the discipline to actually meditate. They fool around, they distract themselves. And so that's why they go to the monastery, is that it's an educational institute. It's like going to school. Theoretically, you could just read the books yourself at home, but who does? So that's why you send your kids to school, or even if you homeschool your kids, somebody's in charge of making sure they study and read the books and so forth. So it's just human nature that when you're on your own, quite often you're not self-disciplined enough and you benefit from the group. But then again, sometimes groups have other agendas going on where they interfere with your capacity to meditate. So you're going to have to decide which one is more beneficial to you.
The next question from the chat is from Laura. Dear Ajahn, how did you avoid boredom and falling into routine ruts during your time at the shack? Moreover, what was your biggest difficulty during that time? Was it mental or physical? How did you overcome it?
Well, I wasn't attempting to just avoid boredom. I don't think boredom is a positive thing, but what I did in being this is before I was a monk, so I was a hermit for some years in a kind of a rather broken down shack, very unglamorous, with no electricity or radios or newspapers or magazines or books or anything like this to distract me. And I wasn't there by accident. It wasn't because I was, that my house had burned down or that I was incapable of making a living. I chose to do this in a very deliberate way, to put myself in a place of no sensory distractions. So no people around, none of this stuff. And you have a full day, and you're awake 18 hours of that day, and you're just being. I'm making sure that I don't find interesting things to do. I'm not going down to the river and making piles of rocks or, fashioning something out of sticks, or I'm not trying to do that. I'm facing raw existence and asking myself, well, why is this a problem? Why would you make a problem? Why do you have to be busy doing something all the time? There's people are more or less diseased in their need for activity and distracting themselves. But can't we be, rather than endlessly doing? Can't we be? Can't we be happy? Can't we be well, at ease? People have moments of that, but usually it's not more than a minute before they're looking for something else to distract themselves. So in order to overcome boredom, what I realized is I was in of course, a very beautiful natural area with rushing glacial-fed rivers and big old-growth forests and beautiful, moss, emerald moss on the floors and full of animals and things like this. So it was pretty, just raw nature was quite amazing. But if you live there long enough, eventually, you've seen the trees, you've seen the water. There's only so much you can look at these things. And so I would find myself kind of drying out, so what we would call boredom. And I realized that what was happening really is that I'm losing interest. I'm not paying attention. So I would, instead of following your human nature to go and find something interesting, I would just stand there in the middle of the forest and refuse to follow the lack of interest. I would say, come back here, be fully present here. 10 minutes ago, it was great. Why is it not great now? Because it's obviously my mind. It's not the trees. It's not the trees' problem or anything like that. It's me. So I would have to stand there and bring my mind back until I arrived, and suddenly everything would be all right again. So it's our nature to run from boredom, from lack of interest. And that's a mistake, because we'll be running all our lives. We have to sit down and face it and bring our mind back and infuse it with interest, which is another word for presence or mindfulness. And then everything feels good again. And you realize, okay, I am the one. I have to overcome this thing. And if I can, it's more or less retirement on a lovely pension. You don't have to go out into the world to seek interest anymore. You don't have to chase around. Of course, it's your mind. Your mind is the source of all your joys. It's also the source of your sorrows. So if you can figure out how you create your own sorrow, then you will dwell in well-being after that. So that was how I solved the boredom issue. And that's why I was there, so I couldn't get away from it. I was miles from anywhere. I had no vehicle, no way to get out. So I put myself in the situation so that I have to face that and solve that problem. And eventually you do. So then, which was part of the question was, which is more difficulty, the physical or the mental? There was difficulties in both areas because it was no insulation in this building, and there was an inadequate stove for so-called heat. It was almost an ornament, and it was just pathetic. I've been raised in situations of wood heat and harsh climates. I'm from Canada, and I spent years camping in winter and so forth. So I knew what had to be done, but mostly it's like a camping experience. In winter, the place would just go to the temperatures of the outside. It'd be 20 below zero, and inside when I woke up, I had a decent down sleeping bag, so it was not a matter of freezing to death or anything, but you get up at 20 below zero, and it's going to be hours before that stove can give you enough warmth to take off your jacket, So there's physical difficulties as well. And, that's one part of it. And then the spiritual exercises are like, I put myself in that situation on purpose, and I didn't fix that shack up as well on purpose, just to see if I could be okay with the situation. And I did this for some years. So, and then this experiment is over, and it was time to just leave the shack. I learned a lot.
The next question from the chat is from Biomeditator from Pennsylvania, United States. Dear Ajahn, could you please explain similarities and differences between Zochen meditation practices and Terravada?
Yeah, Zochen it's become popular. It's more or less a panoramic awareness teaching. So the problem is that in both, when you say Terravada versus Zochen, who are you really talking about as terms of really dedicated practitioners who are really skillful at either of these things? When you come down to, full engagement in meditation lifestyles and serious continuous practice of meditation techniques, there's not that many people who are serious in either field, but the Theravada has a wide range of practices. You maybe some of you are thinking about vipassana as the Theravada meditation or something like that, but that's a very narrow type of almost commentarial practice. It's a very specific to a specific type of a few teachers, a few schools, etc. And when there's really, traditionally there's 38 different meditation practices, all kinds of things, and including panoramic awareness and rather than single-pointed awareness. The Theravada has a huge range of practices. Zochen seems to kind of be steering away from, single-pointed practices, types of focused concentration on static objects. So, some of the objects are the four primary colors. So one is visualizing blue, red, or yellow, or white, and just engaging in nothing but that engagement, or the primary elements of earth, air, water, fire, or light itself, like a candle or something like this, or the breath. But there's also broad investigations of the body, feelings, mental activities, and the primary experiences of life in the context of Dhamma, in the context of what suffering and its end, and the path to the end of suffering. So there's large panoramic type of activities, and there's focused small activities in the Theravada. Zochen seems to be a kind of emphasis on panoramic awareness. But remember that Zochen is a sect of the Mahayana as well, and behind virtually all of the Mahayana schools is the path of the Bodhisattva. It's a practice which is not advocated by the Buddha in the early teachings. The Theravada, you don't find any of the suttas of the Buddha advocating that people take up the Bodhisattva path. He's primarily, in this early suttas, it's an advocacy of what we would call the Arahant path, the get enlightened as soon as you can and get out of samsara. These later schools, the development of the Mahayana in later times, sweeps through Tibet and China and all Southeast Asia in layer after layer. And so there are multiple Mahayana schools, Vajrayana, Tantric schools, etc. So it's a fragmented, very multiple layered structure. So that the practices within that have to be considered with the context that it is. It's a certain period of historical development and a certain broad background in the Mahayana schools as well, the Bodhisattva schools rather than towards the Arahant school. I started or was familiar first with the Mahayana schools of Tibetan and Zen and so forth, but my choice is, after informing myself of the basic teachings, the history of these schools and the history of Buddhism, etc., my choice is commitment to the Terravada school. And it's not an accident. It's having considered and reflected and examined the history and the claims made by the various schools, I have chosen to be committed to the Terravada. Yeah.
The next question from the chat is from Theodore from Fargo, North Dakota, United States. Dear Lumpur, I have read in the Samyutta Nikaya that it is impossible for a Dhamma follower to die without becoming a Sotapanna. Could you talk about this?
That statement would be very commentarial. The idea of that a person is destined to enlightenment in this life, it is impossible to die without attaining the enlightenment. These are commentarial ideas. There are notions of a person who is some stage of enlightenment, having that they will complete that stage before death. There are such notions of that, but I wouldn't get carried away with the idea that, especially the idea that if somebody tells you that you're destined to enlightenment, that you're not enlightened, but you're destined to enlightenment, some sort of, there's a term called lesser sotapanna, like somebody who's destined to become a sotapanna, or first stage of enlightenment. These are commentarial ideas, etc. So I wouldn't take them too seriously.
The next question from the chat is from So from Malaysia. Hi, Bhante. I've heard that Arahants do not generate new karma, and therefore no new vipaka can arise for them. But when an Arahant or the Buddha gives Dhamma teachings and helps others, lay people often support them in return. How should we understand this support? Why is it not considered the vipaka of their previous actions?
So to understand this is that an Arahant has no further rebirth. So any positive things, and by the way, so they only do positive things. They do no evil. They can't. By the way, it's not something that they choose not to do evil. They simply can't. The system, their mental system, has been cleansed of kind of the ignorance from which negative types of things arise. So they will not experience after this life negative repercussions of anything they've done, including old karma, like lifetimes ago they may have done negative actions which have not had fruition and that are, in a sense, stored up, waiting for fruition, but they will not have fruition because this is their last life. There's no further rebirth. The good things they do in this life and the good things they've done in previous lives, they'll have also a bank of positive actions which have not come to fruition yet and will not come to fruition because there's no place for it to come to fruition. They will not take rebirth. So they will take no further birth after this life. So both good, negative and positive vipaka, which means the fruit of previous actions, will have no place to be to arise. And so that's why the Arahant is beyond good and evil. Beyond good in the sense that whatever good actions they've done in the past or as an Arahant is not going to play itself out in a future life. And nor are any negative actions they've done in the past. But they're not aloof from doing, they can't, you'll see some sort of guru worship stuff where the guru is supposed to be beyond good and evil. They can do dubious kind of actions and yet they will have no consequences, or they're aloof or beyond this. But this is not anything to do with the original teachings of the Buddha. The Buddha himself was very conformed to the rules of conduct for monks. He's aloof and detached, but he's still very well behaved within the moral guidelines of the rules of conduct. So in the teachings of the Buddha, you don't have gurus that are acting in strange, eccentric ways, apparently somehow above the law, So this arises in various spiritual traditions where the guru is above the law. They are engaging in all kinds of weird actions, drinking, drugs, sex, all kinds of stuff like this, and they're supposed to be pure and somehow aloof from it. No. This is not the original teachings of the Buddha. There is no exemptions for that. Yeah, so.
The next question is going to come from the live stream, and there's actually two questions that sort of touch on the dilemma of a good relationship, but then moving towards Buddhist values. So I'm going to read this question from Peter. Dear Ajahn Sona, I've been married for 11 years. I'm clearly drawn to living Buddhist values, but as a secular person. My wife leans towards Western values, family, romantic love, and the joy of life. How do I find the answer to the question of whether it's better to stay together or separate? Will the answer come to me when I create the right conditions for it to appear? Thank you for your suggestions.
Yeah, it is unfortunate. The Buddha has broken up a few marriages. This is, it's a a growing difference of values. And when you're investigating Dhamma and the big issue, the big picture of life, when you're basically a philosopher and of a certain kind, so there are sensory, Western philosophy has had to go through this all as well, and there are advocates of the sensory life, gather ye rosebuds while ye may, delight in the sensory experiences. That's one sort of philosophy, but it's a low philosophy. It's not satisfying to the intelligent person. It's like, okay, I've had enough chocolate pudding. I mean, is that it? Is that all there is to life? Another fancy meal or something like that, or another movie, or what? Or another affair, Intelligent people grow weary of this. They find it shallow. It's just the way. And there's going to be less of those kind of people. Just like the intelligence curve, the IQ curve is that, let's say that the average score is 100 on the IQ. So half of the population is below 100 and half of it above. But like 70% are in the middle, within 15 points of 100. And then it goes off it gets less in both directions. So there's very few people who are, like 60 or less on the IQ, and there's very few people that are 130 or so on the IQ scale. So, and they're not going to be interested in the kind of things that people that have a 90 IQ are interested in. They been there, done that. And so this is the same in the spiritual bell curve. The spiritual bell curve, as you move up the scale, you become more marginalized. You become less able to indulge in the kind of what people find meaningful and entertaining in life. That person finds shallow, negative perhaps, meaningless, silly. So they marginalize themselves because that's the way it is. You simply have to. You can't pretend otherwise. You can't indulge in the same stale jokes. You can't indulge in the same stale behavior. It's meaningless. And but you're often entangled. You're entangled with your relatives. You're entangled with your fellow workers. You're entangled with family relationships, marriage sometimes, and you realize, well, you're not one of them. And then the question is, well, do I stay and try to escape as much as possible? Flee to your bedroom when the relatives show up, go on holiday, or go out and mow the lawn or something when the relatives are having a drinking party and coarse jokes are going on. Where are you going to go? Off to the park, perhaps. What? This is the nature of spiritual development, is that you develop yourself right out of normality. And quite often it ends up in living, going your separate ways. That's all there is to it. Well, you can't dumb yourself down,
The next question from the chat is from Logan. Is there a place in Buddhist thought for platonic forms such as beauty, justice, and the good? What do you make of Plato's idea that the sensible world is a distorted reflection of these?
Yeah, I think it's I studied philosophy when I was a young guy, 18, went to school and was exposed to Platonic ideas and found it very fascinating, and have throughout my life. The Greek philosophers, probably more so than the later European philosophers. But yeah, I think that Platonic ideas, the good, the true, the beautiful, as kind of like realities behind the substances, has something to it. From a Buddhist point of view, there are absolute laws. There are laws of morality, and the universe works on these laws, these principles. Buddhism, by the way, acknowledges more like 5 laws, 5 different types of laws, which are behind the events of existence. The first one is the laws of physics. And this is called Utu Niyama. Niyama is kind of law, and Utu is what we would say is physics. Why is it raining? Why are there waves in the ocean? These are physical principles. And the West has very, glommed onto the principles of physics, especially in the last few hundred years. And then there's the laws of biology. So you have living beings which don't behave like non-living beings. It's not just the laws of physics to explain biology. There are beings that are alive. And then there's something called, and that's called bija niyama, the law of seeds. So when we see a seed from a flower, you plant it, and something very similar to that flower comes up. So they recognize there's sort of genetic laws. And that's functioning in life, and in humans as well. Why your nose looks like your father's nose, or your mother's ears, or whatever. So they recognize this as a separate law. And then there's laws of the mind. How does the mind work? We call it psychology. Are there laws of psychology? They thought so, and of course in this day and age, it's not quite like physics. Psychology is a soft social science, but there seems to be operating laws of the mind. And then that's it for the West: physics, biology, psychology. Buddhism has 2 more. One is the law of karma, so the more the moral law that intentional actions have results, and it's just built into the universe. No one needs to keep track of it. You don't need God or anybody to keep track of it. You don't need God to keep track of physics or biology or psychology, and you don't need God to keep track of morality either. Morality is just built into the universe, and certain intentional actions will have certain results that they're in accord with the original intention. Evil gets negative results, and good gets good results. And then there's a 5th law, which is called Dhamma niyama, and that's more or less how these 4 other laws interact with each other. So your moral interaction can change your psychology, it can change your biology, and it can interact with the physics of the environment. Events which are primarily physical can be influenced by biology and by psychology and by morality as well. So this is that there's something behind these events. Buddhism would disagree that it boils down to physics, that there's just all atoms and empty space, and that's all there is. And of course, in modern times, there's an endless debate going on right now about what is consciousness. Consciousness, the hard problem of consciousness. Like, is consciousness merely brain activity? Is it some sort of side effect of brain activity? Some philosophers say there is no such thing as consciousness. There's only brain activity, only physical activity. And biology is just a form of physics. You could attempt to explain everything through mere physics, hardcore materialist science. Buddhism rejects that there are independent, there are laws that are interacting with each other, and they have some independence, including the laws of consciousness. So, yeah, I would say that there are kind of universals behind the manifestations. Yeah. One last question.
The last question for today is from the chat. It's from Abhishek. There is emptiness, but we are still experiencing something. What is it?
Yeah. It's the problem of identity in change. And this is recognized in Western philosophy. I don't know when it started to be that they become aware of this, but Buddhism has a long history of this. I would say there's two schools of this. One is the Terravada. The emptiness of the Theravada is the emptiness of the self, the absence of self. But it doesn't deny the presence of what are called the khandhas. There is a body, feelings, perceptions, volitions, consciousness, but they're all processes. And then the vexing problem comes up. Well, if all of these are like flowing events at the smallest level, the highest level of magnification of the microscope, what actually is there? If everything is changing, what is changing? The Greeks solved this issue by inventing something called the atom. They also worked through this intellectually, very parallel to the Buddhists. They said, if you take a piece of wood and you cut it in half and cut it in half and cut it in half, how many times can you cut it in half before you can't? And that's the presumption, is that you would come to a point where you can't. And this thing that you can't, when you can't cut it in half, it's called an atom. An atom literally means not cuttable, to something that can't be cut. So you're down to see, the problem is, the vexing problem for the human intellect is like, you can't be infinitely cuttable, because there wouldn't be anything. And a whole school of philosophy, Buddhist philosophy, is into that kind of analysis, where actually behind the apparent reality it's simply illusion. It is empty of substance. Early Buddhism doesn't concern themselves too much with the emptiness of substance of things. Once you've done away with the self, you've basically solved the problem, and the variety of life, what exists out there, and whether it's empty or not is pretty well irrelevant. When there's no self, who cares? This is the thing, eh? Once there's no self, like, who cares? Like, who wants to do philosophy? So emptiness doctrines emphasized, particularly in the Mahayana schools, are, okay, right, okay, good enough. But the main issue is once you undo the illusion of self, then the problem of suffering has been solved. So this is the nature of things. Yeah. Okay, well, we will leave it for today. All kinds of juicy, good questions, fun and games in philosophy. So we will see you next week.